Thank you for joining me for another episode of Wake and Empower TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I'm joined in person by Teal Swan, who happens to be here in Detroit, Michigan. So welcome to Detroit.
Thank you.
I know it's not your most favorite place in the world, but we're still glad to have you here. So what brings you here?
Well, actually, I do a lot of out-of-body travel. In fact, it's more difficult for me to be in body. And I've been doing that both spontaneously and by choice since I was very young. Now, a lot of times, those of us who have the capability of going out of body, we're called out of body. It's almost like a magnetism when people are in trouble. And I tend to be called the most for emotional tragedy. So I have to say that when it comes to America as a country, I get called nowhere more than Detroit. So when I had to do a training to teach people how to basically perform emotional midwifery with this new process of mind completion process, Detroit was the natural choice for me. Because I had to think about where needs this kind of process the most. This was the answer. So here I am.
So we have that many people here who have a need for that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like you to talk about what that process is in a few minutes, but could we start a little by talking a bit about your background and really anything significant and any life-changing moments in particular that might have stimulated or inspired you to end up on the path that led you to be an author and everything else that you've done?
Well, I'm one of those people that I feel like was actually born on this path. I feel like I chose it even before I came in, and I was more close to that as a young child than I was even as a young adult. I was an extrasensory, born that way. It wasn't a gift that I had to develop. It was more like a curse, more like a disability, in fact. I was banging into tables, thinking I could walk through walls, seeing colors around people, diagnosing illnesses before people knew they had them. From age 2, 3, 4 is when my parents started to notice that. And I had really scientific and intelligent parents who were part of the mainstream science world. And so when they had this child who had those abilities, they were confused, to say the least. And that would have been bad enough because I really didn't fit into my family very well based on that. But they ended up moving to this very rural part of Utah. And this rural part of Utah, unfortunately, is home to a very dangerous cult, multiple cults, in fact. And it just so happened that my extrasensory abilities were something that the demographic people there and highly religious people actually believed in. But they believed that they came with the powers of priesthood, which can only belong to men. So if it belongs to a woman, it's a gift of the devil. So when I entered school around all these very religious people, I wasn't received well, to say the least. And they started thinking, she's a sign of the second coming. There's something really off about this. This is a non-Mormon family, too, that this kid is coming from. So I was really, really exiled, I guess, from the community and not allowed to participate in anything. But that would have been bad enough. But these cults in the area, they believe it's their direct job to rid the earth of evil. So when they saw me with all my abilities, they assumed this is a demon that's taken over the body of a little girl. And it just so happens that one of my parents' kind of loose family acquaintances belonged to this cult. And so he infiltrated himself in between me and my parents and became my mentor, which my parents let happen because I was a really miserable child. Most extrasensory children who are born to parents that don't understand how to raise an extrasensory children and all their sensitivities, they end up quite miserable. So it's not a real surprise that happened. But my parents were kind of like, if anybody knows what to do with this or how to culture this, just come help us because we don't know what to do to make this kid happy. But unbeknownst to them, this very man was a complete psychopath who was torturing me, using me to pick up other children so that he could kill them, prostituting me from a young age, and sexually abusing me himself. And I was drugged around from cult ritual to cult ritual, used in these rituals to invoke the devil, depending on which cult he decided to go to on the given day. He had multiple personalities, so one belonged to one cult, one belonged to another cult, or else praying over me to try to exorcise this demon. And I was tortured like that for 19 years. Or 13 years, sorry. I got away when I was 19. So it lasted, I say about from 6 years old to when I ran away at 19 years old. So that was a 13-year span. When I was 19, I escaped. It was, like torture. Most people love to think that the process of recovery ends when you escape from a situation, but that's actually just the beginning. And sometimes the process of healing is bad enough that you don't know whether it was really worth it. Mm-hmm. And I wish that I could say to everybody looking back on it that it was absolutely worth it because I'm so happy all the time today. But it's not the truth about healing from something like I had to endure. It's been the most difficult thing that I can possibly imagine. And at times it has felt much, much, I guess, bigger than I thought that I could, potentially deal with. But here I am today. When I originally escaped, I went into professional athletics. I had no other life skills. I was a shell of a person. All I could do was push my body to the limit, because going through pain, you learn how to dissociate from pain. And for an athlete, that's really beneficial. It means where most people have that line that they can't cross, I can cross it. So I excelled pretty quickly. Never made a huge name out of myself in any sport that I was in, but I was doing it competitively. And basically, I got to a point where it was like I was trying to heal from everything that I had walked away from, trying to put my life back together again after all this trauma, trying to reintegrate into society again. And the psychology community had a really bleak prognosis for me. Their prognosis was there's only so much that you can do given the amount of developmental trauma that you've had. You're going to be dealing with dissociative seizures for the rest of your life. You're going to be dealing with relationship issues for the rest of your life. You're going to be struggling with disorganized attachment for the rest of your life. So I just hated it. I absolutely hated it. I got to a point where I was like, this is not going to work. You don't get to tell me that my life is going to be hell just based off of this circumstance I ended up in when I was, 6. So my own healing process actually forced me to turn back towards my own spirituality, which I had just run away from. And I have the capacity, and it never stopped even when I was doing sports, to go out of body and things like this. And I started using it to kind of explore the dynamic on a soul level of trauma, and why healing works in the way that it does, why it's not working in the way that it's currently being done. And what actually blew my mind, because when you're given a gift, right, you take it for granted. So what blew my mind is that so many people didn't know really common stuff about the way that the universe works, stuff that I would take for granted. I find other things really difficult, like put me in an airport, for example, tell me to find my gate, and I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, but it's very easy for me to explain to somebody the way that the universe works in terms of thought and how energy attracts like energy and things like that. So running into all these people that didn't know that, I suddenly saw the opportunity, not just for healing myself this way, but also for really giving people the key to their freedom. Freedom is not something I really actually struggled with, ironically, on a mental level, because I was so suicidal. And when you're really suicidal, the benefit of that is that all the crap and all that, let's say the tribal information that keeps tying you to the job and keeps tying you to this kind of societal crap, it was no longer there anymore because it didn't matter. My life was about, am I going to live in the next 2 minutes or not? So the freedom that creates is you can decide to do whatever the hell you want. What is there to be really afraid of? At the end of the day, there's a lot of conditions on earth that are worse than death. So I found it very easy to offer this kind of freedom to people. And not only did I find that it was fun for me, it was my entire life at that point. It was passion. Literally, it was like something just lit up in me, and I was like, my gosh, I'm back to where I was when I was born here, but in a good way this time. I sort of feel like I'm in my passion, I'm exactly where I belong. And sometimes I think it's funny because I used to hang out with these people on my teams who were gold medalists. They were the best of the best. And it was like, no matter what I did to try to train for those sports, I was never making the podiums. And here they are, they get drunk off their ass. They are, screwing everyone within a 5-mile radius. They wake up after 3 hours of sleep and they're able to win. And I was like, wouldn't I kill to know what it feels like to walk into that playground and just know that I'm the best? And for the first time, once I entered into this field, that's been what it feels like. It's it's an untouchable confidence, but it's not like boasty. When you're insecure about your own capability in a field, you start to boast, right? It's not like that. It's just it's like complete confidence about being where you're supposed to be and knowing what you know. And it has been an amazing feeling.
So what kind of abilities did you have as a child, or do you have now?
Well, the best way to conceptualize my abilities is to think about a filter that's cracked, and so everything's getting through. So instead of having 1 or 2 or 3 of the extrasensory abilities, I've got them all. So I'm watching thought forms. I'm auditory sensitive. I'm clairvoyant, but it's not in the mind's eye. Like I'm literally on a physical level observing all of the fields of energy. The best way to understand how life is for me is to just go take ayahuasca. That is what it is like for me all day, every day. I can't get away from it. So it has made life a little bit difficult. So. I also have synesthesia, which is quite common for extrasensory. So for example, if you were to clap your hands loud, I could see that in the visual field. And so like also, if you understand energy fields, they collect into a physical embodiment. And so if you're able to see energy fields, it means that skin is not a barrier for you. It means you can see through and watch how blood is moving through veins, how organs are functioning. You can even sometimes see down to the cellular level in terms of how the cells are communicating with each other, whether they're actually getting energy. And that's just on what we would consider a more physical level than watching all of the meridians and the chakras and how that whole energy system is working. Also, when people think thoughts and subsequently feel emotions, I'm watching that in the human auric field, which has actually become part of my work now, because like let's say that you were to feel a sensation of joy. Regardless of whether it's you or your neighbor, joy actually takes the same pattern and overall color within the human aura. And so I figured if I start tracing these vibrations, which are highly geometric actually. They look very mandala-like. But if I start to sketch them, start to etch them down, and then I introduce that frequency into somebody's life, it causes an entrainment. So I'm now doing paintings also of these frequencies that are serving like homeopathic paintings, basically. Yeah.
So the paintings, you color them in the way that you want that person's energy field to change?
I color them in the way that it depends on the image, because some of them are what we consider more organic vibrations, and others have been created by extraterrestrial races, for example, and those are much more intentional. But the organic ones, things like the frequency of joy, it will show up in a very specific pattern and a very specific color, regardless of who it is that's feeling it. So I try to trace it exactly as possible. But the hard part about frequencies is that they're constantly in motion, so I have to catch a freeze frame, unfortunately, because I'm limited to canvas.
Now, I've heard you say that you chose your family because of a particular bloodline.
Yes.
Right? So I'm curious, a lot of times when these kinds of abilities show up in an individual, they usually carry through at least with one person in the bloodline through many generations. Oh, yeah. Has that been the case in your family?
Absolutely the case. It went through my mother's line, primarily my mother's line. And it's basically a descendant of all these Irish and Celtic, essentially, witches. So yeah, I selected her specifically based off of that lineage, because it makes it easier to come into the body in that way.
And now I also find that a lot of times when that's the case, when they're incredibly gifted individuals, they usually have some extraterrestrial contact in this life as well. Do you have an awareness of that?
Myself?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And obviously your family lineage also.
No.
I imagine. No?
Believe it or not. They were much more tied to the earth. I mean, we could say that if you're connected to astrology and things like that, that you are being influenced, whether you know or not, by extraterrestrial influences. But my grandmother basically shut down a lot of that awareness. My mother shut it completely down, didn't want anything to do with it. It scares the crap out of her. So, I mean, they have never spoken to me, nor have I heard anything in the family lineage about extraterrestrials. But that changed with me.
So is there a particular race of beings that you primarily have been involved with?
Arcturian.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That seems to be going around. So I'd like to get back to that comment you mentioned about astrology and extraterrestrials. I don't get the connection. I've been a long-time student of astrology, so...
Well, when human beings get into a state where they become interested in astrological events, from a six-dimensional perspective, if you are looking at Earth, that interest shows up as a ping. So it actually makes you more accessible or more noticeable to extraterrestrial species who are surveying or observing Earth. So quite often it's not really the Joe down the street who gets the kind of contact with certain extraterrestrial beings, the one you really want to have contact with. Getting into a conversation about extraterrestrials is quite complicated because there are so many different races that are involved with planet Earth and so much misinformation about each one of them. But there are some species that hook into human fear. Now, that person who ends up a match to those particular beings is not likely actually to have a lot of spiritual awareness. They're not likely to be interested in things like astrology. They're likely to be a match to them based on the fact that they emit fear. And fear is an interesting chemical, an interesting experience for them to study. So it's not like the minute you become spiritual, you're going to line up with X amount of X race, or the minute that you are terrified, you're going to line up with this extraterrestrial race. It's not that simple, but in general, the extraterrestrial races that are looking to communicate and looking to actually participate here on Earth will find the people who are already asking. They're already in a space of questioning about what's beyond this.
So in general terms, all of us astrologers are contacting with extraterrestrials.
Yeah, I have. I'm yet to meet one that hasn't, yes.
I'm not conscious of that, but it's very likely.
Yeah, becoming conscious of what happens, I guess, to you, especially in dream time, is quite difficult for people. It seems to be the next step. I'm quite interested in people becoming conscious of what is happening when they're dreaming. Do you practice that yet?
Not really, no. That's one thing I don't really practice. But I am pretty heavily involved in the whole extraterrestrial conversation. Half my episodes of the show are on that subject, so...
Yeah, it's the most easy to access people when they're not in a state of resistance. When we go to sleep, we're essentially exiting the body. That's what most people don't know. All dreaming, you're out of body for. But you go out of body back to source consciousness, you come back in body, which, I mean, I hate talking in terms of time, because time literally doesn't exist in these higher dimensions. But for the sake of our human understanding, in split seconds, as you come down into the physical embodiment, you are passing through these higher dimensional planes. Higher dimensional planes, it's where they exist. And so let's say you're passing through a six-dimensional thought field, even if it's your own, it becomes very easy for extraterrestrials to interact. It becomes very easy also for other thought forms, things that people have been calling angels, for example, to interact with you when you're sleeping. But then the issue, of course, is that when you come back into your consciousness, you're embodied, basically, your brain has to then translate that experience. And so we get a hell of a lot of, warping in terms of the original experience in its unaltered and raw state versus our interpretation of that experience. We will always interpret everything according to our current understanding. It's one of the reasons why when you go out of body, you perceive movement. No movement actually occurs. So you're a bit limited by perception.
So how did you go from all of that to writing a book and becoming a published author and everything that you're doing now?
Well, I had this genius thing happen where it was like, I was driving in the car and I stopped at a stoplight, and I was seeing individual clients at the time, which I had opened up to. Now, something that most people don't know about me is that when I was young, my parents were kind of going back and forth between sort of letting people benefit from my abilities and being like, oh God, this is like, we don't know what this is, and if this is normal for a child to have to deal with this kind of stuff, we don't know if we were going to go there. So sometimes their friends would come over and be like, I just need to ask Teal a question, because they started to know what I was capable of doing. And so in the beginning of turning back towards spirituality, I opened the door to individual clients. So I had already established a base of them by that point. And I was really kind of enjoying that, but it was really frustrating me that, to make sessions worthwhile, you got to charge a certain amount. Otherwise, it's just exhausting, But I'm not retarded. I'm looking around the world and thinking, the majority of the people that actually need this information, they can't afford a session with me. So how could I get this information to everyone? And that was that moment. I'm stopped at the stoplight and I'm looking over and there's a guy digging through a trash can. And I was just like, what could I do to reach that guy? And so the first thing I thought of before I realized that there was anything like YouTube, by the way, I didn't even know at this point it existed. So before I even knew about YouTube, my first conceptualization was, okay, well, a book. I could even donate books to libraries, and then he may find it that way. Oh my gosh, I have to write a book on the way the universe works. So I did that, and that was my first book. And my career just literally took off. It's sort of the thing where I didn't do it, I did not do my career. I did not plan my career. It just sort of happened. And so when I wrote the book, I started promoting it. I started doing one or two workshops in tandem with it where I wanted to have open discussions with people, which was the first version of these synchronization workshops that I do now. And then the first person asked me to a different city than I lived in, and then the first person to a different country than I lived in, and it just was like, you know. And then I conceptualized, of course, the fact that I could be on YouTube, and then people could get this crap for free. I just called my own stuff crap. But I mean, that's what I was thinking. I was just like, oh my God, you know, I could reach everybody. I could make this stuff available to everybody so that they don't, you know, they don't have to basically have the means to get this stuff. So that can just be, you know, I mean, if you have it, you can come to this thing. But if not, like, you've got enough. You have enough, which I love. I absolutely love that. So, yeah, that's the story of how my career started. And then there's just like one more book, and then another book. It just sort of just leads, you know. That's how passion works. That's how your real purpose and calling works. You don't really have to do it. It does you. So it's the kind of thing where I wake up and I can't hold this kind of stuff back. Sometimes I wish I could. Sometimes I have those moments where I'm like, why in the hell did this, you know, job choose me? Because it is so much pressure. But the reality is, it's like I'm doing the job I couldn't not do if I tried. I can't not do this. Even when I'm having a really bad day where it's like, you know, the hate groups, the anti-Teal groups have slaughtered everything that I care about, I wake up and I'm still like, oh gosh, this is destroying me. Hatred. Let's write about hatred. See the instant conversion? So, yeah. I can't not do this work is the reality. So.
In your interactions with the Arcturians, did that open up any of your gifts or rather trigger them? No, it was already there. Okay. I find a lot of times people who have extraterrestrial contact, they are either awakened or they're shown where they're going in the future. And you have been shown some of the future, I think, right? We'll talk about that later, but yeah.
Yes, a lot of it.
Okay. So tell me about the process that brought you here to Detroit.
Process?
That's your new book, right?
Oh, okay. I'm like, the process of choosing to... No, okay. This process, the completion process. All right. So, taking you back to that time in my life where I was trying to heal from trauma, obviously having gone through intense therapy after I got out, I was exposed to all kinds of techniques that people use for trauma healing. And I mean, some of them I really liked. It was a really brand new concept, for example, that I had an inner child. That was the first place I was ever introduced to that idea. At first, I had a terrible relationship with the inner child. But there was something about the inner child work I was doing that wasn't resolving anything, right? And so it sort of was like, over the last X amount of years, I've been introduced to these different ways of dealing with trauma that I've liked, but they haven't all fit together quite right. And on top of that, I started to really think to myself, like, trauma healing is not just about the brain, it's about the way that the soul operates. I understand that based off of being extrasensory, based off of going out of body. I understand that consciousness, for example, can fracture, it can fragment. Most people don't know this. Because we love to conceptualize of things as static things, but consciousness functions more like water. So if a stream of water breaks off from the main current of the river, it's not broken, it's the same thing. See? So that's the way that our consciousness functions. So knowing that, and knowing really why it is that we get stuck in the way we do in these past experiences, I was like, there has to be some way to bring all of this together. And yet again, it wasn't one of these things where I just logically came up with some process. It's the kind of thing where I naturally started doing soul integration work, where I was weaving in inner child processing, and also asking people to do this practice that I call emotional vipassana, which is sinking into the emotion first, because I know exactly why it's there, you see? It provides a giant open doorway to finding the actual unresolved trauma that we're dealing with. So I was actually doing this process very spontaneously. I wasn't really conceptualizing of it as much. But I was leading some of my clients through it, and one of my clients was like, you have to actually turn that into a process, like an actual process people can follow. It never occurred to me that I could even do that. Because, I mean, to be honest, I haven't really trusted that people can do with other people what I do with other people based off of the fact that I have all of these cheating tools, let's call them extrasensory abilities. So I don't have to guess at what people are thinking or where they are mentally. So it's very easy for me to see how to lead them through something. But I started to think, actually what I'm doing is facilitating a process that happens naturally within the being. So I could train people to do that, and I could potentially see if there are concrete steps I could identify in this process that I've been using to put people back together again, and I actually managed to figure them out. So once I figured them out, I wrote this book. It took me 2 months. It was done so fast. I was like running through the house like Eureka, and I was like, this is it. This is it for me. Like, I know I'm going to create a hell of a lot more in the future, but right now this is the whole passion. And I've dedicated almost all my energy into this effect in the last 3 years. Training facilitators now. And the entire process is based on the premise that the entire reason, this is me coming up against the psychology community, dissociation is not a byproduct of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is what actually causes it. So in the moment of going through a trauma, if we don't have the capacity to find resolution with that trauma, a piece of our consciousness splits off, part goes forward, part stays back. It is that dissociation that causes what we're looking at in the future and calling post-traumatic stress disorder. And whether we're going through a flashback on a visual sense or else an emotional flashback, which we could call a trigger, I started to think to myself, like, what do we know as extrasensories, as medical intuitives, as alternative health freaks? We understand that the body never does anything against the person who is called by that name, and it's their body, right? It's never going to do anything against you. So even a cancer cell is essentially not against you. So if we look at this idea that your body has always got the symptoms it has because it's trying to help you in some way, what would be the point or the purpose of these flashbacks? And it was instant. I mean, it doesn't take much. Probably just saying that, a lot of people watching this are like, oh, I get it. Obviously, if you're getting a flashback in any way, it's trying to call you back. See, the mainstream medical community loves to look at a flashback and say, oh, it's just intrusion. Like, it's your brain misfiring and you have to do something to get that to go away. What if you went with it instead? So I developed this process, basically, which takes people directly into their triggers and directly into their flashbacks so that they can have access to the unresolved event and thus cause resolution. Now, that's fun and super interesting to an average psychologist could get why that's great, but if you talk to somebody who understands the quantum nature of this universe, it makes it even more interesting, because if there is no space and time, and if the only aspect of your embodiment that you would need a time machine for is your physical body, you still have your mental and your emotional body. What we see when people are actually going back to memories is that they are going with their emotional and mental bodies, that they are actually time traveling. So when they are making these alterations to the causation, the trauma that they experience, you will inevitably watch a complete change in the course of events for the person on a mental and emotional level in the present. The only aspect of their life that hasn't changed is the physical aspect. So it's been so fun to do this work and so incredibly meaningful, because I didn't even know the implications to begin with. I started working with people going back in trauma, when they were serious addicts, for example. I've worked with them. Addicts where a medical doctor would say it's a cellular addiction. There's no way that you're going to be able to get past that. You're going to have to go through a withdrawal, even on a physical level. So I'm thinking, okay, this is going to take forever. I started working with addicts, started taking them back. Once they resolve the issue that actually caused them to start using in the first place, they have no craving. So that was surprising, and I wasn't really anticipating finding that out until I started working with them. But I'm watching this thing happen where when we take people back and do this intense journey work, it's catalyzing such extreme change in their adult life. And it makes sense, because if you think of a root, all branches come off of that root. So if one of these branches is an addiction, if one of these branches is negative relationships, if one of these branches is I can't get money, and we go back to the root of what caused that, and we undo the root, naturally the branches have to change. It can't be other than that. And it happens that fast. So yeah, it's pretty like hold on to your seats type of process.
I've heard you say that to want to, and I could be messing up how you said it, but something along the lines of to want to change some aspect of yourself is to not love yourself.
Yes.
So how is this process different?
Okay, I'll tell you.
Yes.
So in the beginning of healing, and of spirituality, anything, we start on that path because we want to be different. So I'm not meaning to make an enemy of the fact that we want change in some way. But what I'm suggesting is that once we progress through the path of healing, through the path of integration towards the path of enlightenment, there comes a point where you basically run into a wall. And the wall is, sorry, you're not going any further until you realize that this entire quest you've been on is self-hating. And the entire thing the only way you can get past this doorway, so to speak, is to realize that this quest has to end. So at that point, you'll watch even the completion process. People will get into it because they want to get off of an addiction. That's a clear action step change they want to make, right? But they'll run into a point after using it for a while where it's like, I just can't get past this. Like, this isn't working to make life good anymore. And the crux is that this process is actually taking them to that point where it's like, you're going to be unconditional with me. That's my test for you now. And all of us will inevitably run into that phase. So I think one of the biggest challenges for people who are spiritual teachers, like myself, is that we have to explain to people a multidimensional universe where there are contradictory truths that exist simultaneously. So on one dimensional level, it is true that, it's wonderful to follow your joy and it's all about healing and change and expansion. And on another level, all of that quest is inevitably empty because it takes you farther and farther away from yourself. Both are true. So what it's about for the average person is to look at where they are and apply the spiritual practice that is the closest to where they are right now for their path of progression. So it's almost like spirituality, enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it, healing, same thing. It brings you in a kind of loop.
Now, I've been a long-time student of astrology, and we started talking about that a little bit earlier. And now I've explored this on my own many years to try to understand where consciousness meets astrology and these kind of things. And about a year ago, I had a session with this very famous Indian spiritual master. And so I looked at her astrology cycles, and now I've looked at thousands of charts, so I'm very familiar with this. And there was just so much chaos going on in her chart that an average person would have been under immense stress. Okay. And yet I told her, wow, you must be under a lot of stress. And she said, no. And I said, but you have so much going on. She said, well, I always have a lot going on. And she said, I'm just always in a state of bliss. And so, well, that's one of the examples that I found over the years, which is, it's a rare example, but that the higher the consciousness of the individual, the less they seem to fall into the negative influences or the difficult influences in their astrology or numerology cycles. And so have you found, I guess the underlying question, well, there's several questions here probably, but from your perspective, do we come into this planet with a predetermined experience that we're meant to have?
Yes and no.
Or is anything possible?
The answer is yes and no, because, so let's say you've got your non-physical consciousness, that which you truly are, we could call that. It's the eternal self, which really doesn't perceive itself as a self, but there has to be that consciousness present to then project forward the art piece that is you. You are a creation or an extension of it. But the crux is that it's basically like it's rolled the bowling ball down the alleyway, and that's what you call your life. But now that it has created a separate point of perspective, which is what a physical human embodiment is, that embodiment is now a thought that can think, and so it has free will. So we, as people, we need cognitive closure. We think we need cognitive closure. And so what we want is that definitive answer. We want it to be one or the other. We cannot really accept the fact that it's both, that we have an aspect of our life that is chosen, that we chose before we got here, and an aspect there where we're constantly choosing, based off of our free will and our focus, exactly what we line up with every second of the day. We have this open slate of potential. But oftentimes what I watch is that people don't step off the path of what they originally chose. Because you are no different than your higher self. It's not another person. It's you. So even the things that you could call fate were chosen by you. It's an aspect of free will, but larger free will than you have access to.
So let's say that somebody comes into a particular life experience. And obviously lots of people live to different ages.
Yes.
And so can we choose to extend our life to a certain... So, and do we do that? I guess I'm trying to understand. And you talked about this in one of your other interviews, so I wanted you to talk about this here. But so do we do that through physical choices? For example, eating healthier. I mean, obviously there are many people who smoke cigars until they're 80, 90 years old, and yet there are other people who are 30 years old in good health and they get hit by a car. So, not that that's funny, but so how is it that we're making that choice to, and what determines the length of lifespan?
What determines the length of lifespan is whether you're continually expanding in this time-space reality that you're living in. So essentially, if you're still gaining that out of this life experience, there's a reason to stay, but most people don't continue. In fact, if you watch the average person, they go through a spike of expansion into their early 20s. Then they pick a job, usually. It's in tandem with these types of life choices. And they learn only those skills, and then they practice only those skills, and so they get into a rut. And then, the universe tries to chuck in a midlife crisis, which is another attempt to try to get another learning curve so that there's more expansion. But rarely is it acted on. Usually somebody buys a car and then goes right back to doing the exact same things that they were doing. And so what you watch is a steady decline after that in the way that people are expanding. So if we were able to get expansion out of this reality and change careers enough, or change the variables within our career enough that we were getting expansion out of what we were doing, we would continue to live here. But obviously the freshness of the new perspective of coming into another life calls us forward quite often, because we exhaust the amount that we can learn in one embodiment and from one perspective. Once you get locked into a perspective, you no longer serve the universe. When it comes also to physical health, we have to start realizing that if you can look at a person as a fusion of mental, emotional, and physical. By the way, emotional is what we've been calling spiritual. Really, spirit comes into a mental expression, comes into an emotional expression, and comes into a physical expression. So what we're calling spirit is all of these things. But when we're saying, mind, body, spirit aspect is actually emotion. So if we realize that health is a combination of all of these things, then you'll start to see that all these choices bleed together. So if you're making healthy lifestyle choices, that's going to benefit your mind. If you're making healthy choices mentally, it's going to benefit your emotion. All of these things go together like this beautiful pie. But most of them are dictated by the way you think. If I'm going to be quite honest, it seems to be the one that reigns triumphant over everything. So it's like if you're thinking in a certain way and that thinking is beautiful, then it radiates down into the emotional embodiment, and that then affects your lifestyle choices. So you'll see that sometimes, not even sometimes, it's very rare to meet somebody who is not, in a beautiful way on a thought level, becoming enlightened, essentially, who does not also reflect that on the emotional level, whose life does not also reflect that. That's why when you get into the spiritual field, you may be eating hamburgers, and you may be eating junk food, and you may be making crappy life choices, and you just can't do it. You get to a point in your own awakening where it's like, that food doesn't work for me anymore. I don't know what it is. I just woke up and couldn't do it anymore. It's like the minute I eat it, you get rashes now, But that's super common. It's because as you increase your frequency, you can't be a match to those things. So, yeah.
Well, let's take a couple of famous people so I can illustrate this idea a little bit more clearly. Okay. So Steve Jobs, for example, obviously somebody who was very passionate, and he was living his life right to the very end and innovating in his own unique life expression, right? Yeah. And yet he died. And Walt Disney, for example, another example, lived a very similar life, passionate and doing all kinds of things right to the very end. And neither of them really felt like they were done. Yeah. So what is it that they did, or what caused them to leave this incarnation?
Well, for a lot of them, what it is that they cannot actually evolve beyond the trauma that they experienced, so there's no resolution actually being created. I mean, a perfect example of this, I really hate to call them out publicly because it's just like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the channeler Abraham Hicks. Have you heard of him? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Jerry's another example of this. Somebody who, was living what we would consider to be in alignment. But the thing is that so many people... I gotta back up, actually, to explain something. If you were to take somebody and put them in a beautiful environment, you would find their desire would be less. Oftentimes it is what we would consider to be the negative experiences in life that cause such extreme drive in people. That's why you meet people like your list, and they'll tell you, yeah, I came from this shitty circumstance and this crappy thing, and basically that creates in them this wanting. So it catapults you in this direction, right? And so you create amazing things in the world, but it's almost like the people who do that, they never quite resolve this trauma, and it becomes a shadow that comes with them. And so and oftentimes this gap just gets wider and wider and wider and wider and wider. So you have a person who's like, say they grew up really poor, they make a hell of a lot of wealth, but in that wealth, it's like, okay, as much money as I'm making, I'm feeling even worse and worse and worse and worse, because right now it's actually that you're expanding to the degree where you're being called to resolve that aspect, but you don't do it. You just try to make more money to take over for it. So a lot of times it is the people that are the most successful in life and the ones that are doing the most impactful things with the most momentum behind them that have the most that they're trying to get away from. And the shadow consumes you if you run away too long. So going back to Jerry. Jerry was the kind of person who grew up incredibly poor, right? A lot of trauma around that, a lot of war trauma that even comes through generations. And so if you're not resolving it, and that's my major issue, of course, is that he ended up falling into a practice with a group of beings that is very intent on teaching humanity for where it is right now. Channels have absolutely no reverence for truth. I do wish people understood that, because they love to the point of the channels and be like, look, it's absolute truth. Oh no, channels really don't care. They do not care. There is not the attachment to truth that there is to physical humans. For us, truth and honesty is wound in with our sense of morality. But if you run into an angel, if you run into a channel, oftentimes they'll tell you just exactly what you should hear to make you feel good. And so the little bitty issue there is that if you've got a group of beings that is basically teaching humanity for where humanity is right here and now, and where humanity is right here and now is not even in the empowerment where they understand that they create their own reality, then you've got somebody who really does need to do trauma work. They need to do shadow work, which is actually the next step of intentional creation. However, doesn't. Every time that shadow comes up, you just focus positively. So positive focus actually becomes the very mechanism of escape. And so eventually let's say the bulk of the subconscious mind, because it keeps getting run away from, and when you're running away from something where you're really focused at, the thing you're running away from, it devours the embodiment, and then there's basically like a reset. So that point of perspective that you could call by your name chooses to come into another embodiment, either to go through the entire process, try to do something else with it, or a completely different perspective.
So in that case, in order for someone to live a long and vibrant life, they have to continue to extend themselves to the fullness of who they...
Yes.
Okay. But you're saying that that's not enough. There's also the shadow work that has to happen with it.
Well, that's not a contradiction.
It's the same thing.
Yes, when you will come up, like I said with that doorway before, there will come a point where you have maximized your capacity to go towards the light because of these anchors. Basically, the opposing polarity to where you are going in terms of your desire will start to anchor you to the floor. So it's almost like, I have the best visualization for you if you can. Imagine that I attached a giant anchor to you, and it's wrapped around your waist. But it's got a long cord, right? And so you're down at the bottom of the ocean, and it sucks down there because of the amount of pressure, so you desire to be at the surface, so you start swimming. You're going to feel all of the elevation. You're going to love it. You're going to feel the sunlight as you get closer to the surface, and there will come a point where literally you can't move anywhere else. And most of us, we try desperately to do anything we can to get to the surface, and this is the point in our practice Where if we've been practicing positive focus or things like this, we start to say, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. Like everybody else is getting everything. And suddenly I'm like, okay, I focused all really good all last week. And why am I lining up with the divorce now? So when you get into that space, what's actually needed is that you've got enough light of consciousness that you have to go back down and unhook from the anchor. So most people are not doing that yet, but I'm hoping to shift this, because there's a real misunderstanding within the spiritual field, I guess. There are these two camps, basically, that are at war with each other, and they fit together so nicely, and they just don't know it yet. And the camps are basically pure positive focus. Anything you focus on negatively will attract that into your experience, and the people who know 100% that your practice needs to be about the things you're running away from. So they jive. It's just that most people don't get that they jive yet.
So is shadow work always effective? I mean, is it a one-time thing? So let's take Jerry Hicks, for example. You brought that example up.
Yeah.
So he had this childhood trauma regarding money.
Yep.
Could he just go through one shadow work process and that's gone, or is it always there?
That's the thing. Well, shadowers are not always there, because by virtue of turning consciousness in the direction of them, they cease to become shadows. But what you find when you start diving into the subconscious mind is an entire other reality. It's almost like you're going into uncharted territory. It's like going into the ocean. You have no freaking idea what you're going to find there. And there's chamber after chamber, and the minute you go through one, there's another one. And so what I find with shadow work is that if you go in with the intention for it to be done, you run into that same wall we were talking about earlier, where it's like, really? Your quest to have this be done is what's going to keep you here. So then it's like if you can get it to switch, and you can't force it to do that. It's got to be, I care about being unconditionally with myself, and I'm going to be called back in there over and over again. And then what happens is you stop caring, actually. You really do. You stop caring whether it'll ever end. Because every time you go down there, you come up with such amazing stuff. There's scary stuff in your subconscious mind, but most of the gold of your embodiment is there as well. So I think the major flaw that people who are obsessed about positive focus really have in their theory is that they think that the only thing that exists in the human shadow is negative. Can I give you a concrete example of what I mean?
Sure.
Let's pretend that you came in as a family who really cared about education. But let's say you were an artist, an amazing one. There's no way that family would be accepting of that talent. They would want you to spend more time on things that could make you money, for example. So you would have to get rid of it in order to fit in the family structure. This is the process of socialization. It does this to us. It teaches you certain aspects of me are acceptable, certain aspects of me are unacceptable, and I better get rid of those so they get banished to the human shadow. So when you're doing shadow work at age 40, and let's say you've been an accountant all your life and you just don't relate to yourself as an artistic person, potentially you do a shadow work session, you dive into the subconscious mind, then you come out of it and you're like, wow, for the first time I just really feel like creating something, and perhaps you become the best artist that's ever lived. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you go down into the subconscious. You find all of your disowned confidence, your disowned potential, all of that. So it becomes intoxicating.
I can relate to that story somewhat, although I was never really going in the direction of being an artist, but certainly I didn't follow the path that was the right path for my family.
Yep.
So
no one can relate to that.
So now, I'm sure you're familiar with Osho, the spiritual teacher. Yeah, okay.
I love Osho.
Now
he actually delivered my very favorite speech of all time.
Yeah?
Well, the thing is most spiritual teachers, they've got shadows. People have shadows. We expect everybody to be in a state of enlightened perspective, and that's not going to be the case with anybody. But the reality is that, my God, if you look at that man for what he's capable of, I have never watched somebody set people free mentally so fast. I love it. But yeah, he did a speech that is, to this day, my favorite spiritual speech ever given. So what are you going to say about
Well,
him?
I'm curious which speech that is now that you brought it up.
It's his Osho fuck speech.
Yeah? That's what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to listen to that.
He basically proposed the idea that fuck is going to replace God as the most versatile and powerful word in the entire English language. And it is so great because it makes people take everything less seriously, and it's just so good. It also, he was basically the king of the minute you think that you know how I should be, I'm going to switch on you. So you have to basically be anchorless. And I love that because as a spiritual teacher, people put the pressure of their entire lives on your shoulders. That's what they do. And some people, it benefits them to do that, but there will be a certain point in a student's life where the worst thing you could do for them is to keep them dependent upon you. So pulling the rug out from underneath them makes them find their legs. And sometimes that is the best thing to do for them. He did that all the time, and in a very, much more intense way than even I'm willing to. But you have to have respect for that.
So all enlightened masters also have shadows, is what you're saying?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And it's the secret that every one of them has been trying to hide.
So what is enlightenment then?
I feel like enlightenment is the space where you no longer resist either state. I think anytime somebody's selling you an idea of some sort of a retirement to awakening, they're lost on the path. It's just more heaven. It's just more, let's figure out how to be somewhere else that's better than this. I think the people who we could consider to be the most enlightened are the teachers of presence, to be honest. The ones who tell you there's nothing that is better than this. The ones who will teach you about the idea that it doesn't matter whether you're feeling positive or negative, you don't resist it, and then the pain isn't there associated with it, you're not going to suffer. Those are the people that understand enlightenment the most. But it sure as hell is not a state of perfect bliss. And as long as we, as spiritual teachers, are selling this idea, we're leading people astray. That's one of the main reasons I decided to do what I did with my career regarding authenticity.
So what of the spiritual masters like the one I spoke with about a year ago who say that they're always in a state of bliss? What is that state of bliss? Are you saying that it doesn't exist?
I am. And now I realize that this is not going to go over well. This is going to be one of those things that I say that people are going to get really, really mad at. But I, unfortunately, have to break this belief for people because I get to meet these people as a peer. When you do that, you get to see who they are. And what you don't want to know about your gurus is that the people who live the closest to them get to be exposed to their fits of rage, get to be exposed to their doubting moments, and all the stuff that they never show when they're in front of the stage. Now, to their credit, I've had conversations with many of them about why they have decided to keep all of that stuff behind closed doors, and I can't say that after they've told me what they've told me that I completely disagree with them. I mean, obviously I chose a completely different path with that. See how it goes with me, but when I have talked to the ones who are not just hiding, I mean like hiding because they reject it in themselves and don't even want to admit that it exists within themselves. I'm talking the ones that consciously know that they do that. The explanation that has been given to me is that they refuse to do anything that will make people discount the message because the message is so needed. And I can't argue with them because what have I noticed from my own career? The minute that I decided to be authentic about what I was experiencing by completely publicizing my private life is that people started to do exactly what spiritual teachers feared the most. They throw out the baby with the bathwater. They go, that person is somebody who's out of alignment. They don't have anything that could benefit me to say. In fact, I relate to them too much. What we need is some perfect thing to aspire to become. So I'm not willing to say that we're at a point where everyone has to make that change because I have experienced that many people are not ready for it. But I chose to do the opposite because I feel like there are a select amount of individuals who are ready to sacrifice a guru, meaning no more gurus, meaning we're done with it, meaning the human race is lined up with being able to experience each person for themselves, being their connection to source consciousness as opposed to trying to get to it through the information coming through somebody else. At best, a spiritual teacher should be doing nothing more than guiding people towards what they already know. If the spiritual teacher becomes where you're getting all your information from, it's pornography. It's not spiritual practice.
Now you're very close to Eckhart Tolle, right?
Yes.
And has that been true for him as well? Okay. So that's one of the individuals you're referring to, sort of.
I love him. I really love him. Like, I don't think I would have lived through this year without him. But I do have to admit that I feel quite lonely in the spiritual field because of the fact that, I'll be with other spiritual teachers who profess to be the way that you have said. And then around me, around other people that are peers, essentially, they'll admit to the fact that they're going crazy with, X amount of X person in their following who's doing fill in the blank, and that they're, losing their marriage, for example. And that they're not going to ever say that to somebody else. And there's a part of me that's like, oh God, could you guys just please stand up for me for once? But most of them did the opposite. When I decided to be the spiritual teacher who doesn't have a clear division between personal life and what the public sees, the overwhelming, let's say, bet was that my job would end. Hasn't happened yet, so we'll see.
But is it possible for a human being to reach a state where they can be reactive without actually being emotionally attached to what they're reacting?
Oh, yes.
So, for example, I can get angry because somebody did something, but I'm not actually experiencing the anger as an internal thing. It's just an external expression. Is that possible?
No, it will be an internal experience, but that the way you respond to that internal experience will not create suffering for you. If I was to show you, and I have met those people, and I love them, by the way, but if I was to take like a snapshot from an extrasensory perspective of an average person, when they feel anger, they immediately have a story. We call that the thing that attaches them to that emotion. They have a story about it. And it happens so fast, it is like a chemical reaction. That fast. So they feel the emotion and instantly they turn back against their own emotion and they're struggling with it. And by virtue of the resistance they have to that emotion themselves, the energy builds up so damn fast that there's nothing else to do except for to take an action. That's what that reactivity is about. But in individuals who have mastered the art of presence, individuals who have mastered the art of disidentification, you see them get angry. There is anger there. But they do not resist it at all. So they don't tell any stories about it. And so an emotion, just like water, it passes quite quickly. There is no momentum that gets built behind it. And oftentimes they're the same kind of people where the minute that the thought comes into awareness that is backing that emotional experience, the thought becomes questioned. And so once the thought is questioned, it dissipates in its momentum. These are people who have mastered the art of momentum. They can either completely slow it down or deliberately feed into it. They're not at the mercy of the current of their own consciousness. They do exist, yes, but like thinking that you can get to a space where you don't feel any negative emotion, it's not the case. It's not the case of a human embodiment. That's your internal guidance system. And every being has it, including enlightened beings. So it's not like an enlightened being is going to sit there and watch somebody get murdered and be like, that's wonderful. I'm in a space of perfect bliss watching this person get killed. They're going to feel the negative emotion, but the thoughts like this shouldn't be happening, for example. It's not a thought that is fueled by their consciousness. They're aware of everything they're thinking. So when if they notice their minds thinking, this shouldn't be happening, they question, should this really not be happening? And when you question a thought, you're basically turning the light of consciousness towards it. That means that your actual attention is not in the thought, it's observing the thought. It's a totally different point of attraction. So that's what I observe in these beings.
So how are these beings different from the other enlightened masters that we talked about earlier?
Many are lying to you. If a person sells you on the idea of perfect bliss, they are lying to you. What we find with people who are genuinely in a space that we could call enlightenment is that they experience peace, but peace is absent of extremes. That's why even they, if they're honest with you, will tell you that they don't know whether it's all it's cracked up to be, because you lose some gravity of life experience in peace, in fact. When you develop presence, you don't ever get the throes of emotion, both positive and negative. So we have to really question ourselves. I think it's ironic because the universe doesn't even know the answer to this question. We like to think the universe knows everything, but it's learning about itself all day, every day through our own embodiments here and the extensions of it in physical form. The universe hasn't made up its mind whether it's better to be completely in the throes of emotion or better to be conscious. That's a judgment that we're making. There's something absolutely exhilarating in being at the mercy of the stream. An artist or someone who's in the throes of passionate lovemaking, for example, can tell you that there's something very rich about that experience. And when you're in a state of complete peace, it is not available to you.
So can anyone get to that state, though?
Of peacefulness?
Yes.
Yes.
Regardless of where they start?
Yes.
Through what process? Through the shadow process, or?
I think shadow work helps immensely, but I mean, if you really want to go... I don't really know what it is that I'm trying to give people besides a sense of completeness and a sense of personal choice, meaning I get to choose whether I experience positive emotion. I get to choose whether I experience freedom. I get to choose whether I opt into complete peace of presence. I want to give people that choice. If you're interested in learning about peace, if you're interested in learning about presence, then obviously there's a bunch of people who teach about that. There's people who can teach you how to disidentify. Disidentification is the best way to get to that state of peace, if you ask me. But I haven't made up my mind whether I'm even after that yet. So
I brought up Osho for a reason. As you mentioned, he had some very radical approaches to doing things, and so he was criticized for many things, right?
Yeah, we all know. Every spiritual teacher has to get that warning.
But him probably more than others, I think.
Oh, more than anyone.
Yeah.
He was probably more controversial than any other.
Yeah. So I know that you've got a number of people who are anti-Teal.
That's an understatement.
Right. And some are very aggressive about their opinions. So is this a reflection of the shadow of your childhood and all the traumas you experienced then?
Yes. And every time I go into that, because I mean, it's really easy for us to tell ourselves the story that we're just getting this because of how amazing that we are, and any kind of radical change maker gets this, which is accurate. I mean, the majority of the people who start revolutions end up shot. But it's also a cop-out. So I have spent a lot of years, and continue to, exploring my own points of attraction for this, using this as an excuse, essentially, to dive deeper into these. And every time I find more and more layers. The minute I think I'm fully conscious of all of it, there's another layer. So yes, it's a reflection of my childhood.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you deal with that? I mean, is this a factor of... So would you say that not everybody who becomes well-known, a published author like you have in the spiritual field, ends up with that kind of experience? It's really more of a...
Oh, I know for a fact they don't. I'm the only person.
I see. So it's really a reflection of your own past.
It's a reflection of my past, and also an indication as to just the shift that it's both. So it is a reflection of my past, yes, 100%. But it is also the fact that if you look at the teachings that I'm giving people, and even the embodiment I chose for this life, I'm jarring what people expect. It's offensive. My entire embodiment is essentially an attack. It's not one that I intend to be an attack, but when someone like me steps into the spiritual field, the first thing people do is, spiritual information should not be coming through someone that age, and certainly not one that looks that way. And certainly not one that spends time in, acrylic high heels half the week. So basically, I'm already, just by virtue, even if I wasn't talking, just my embodiment is not something which is going to be in my favor for that. I've also got incredibly controversial views. I mean, when a spiritual teacher comes down to the planet Earth and says, what you've been taught about karma is complete BS, and actually says it in that way, people are like, And also, I have this tendency, most of us do, but I have this tendency to really call people into their freedom pretty quickly, kind of like Osho did. So, and a lot of people are softer. Like, there are some spiritual teachers, many, that are much softer, and their aim is to soothe people. And I love them. There's many of them that I love, but when they sit with somebody, they're going to soothe them into a better feeling state. Someone like me, not exactly my style. Sometimes I wish it was, but it's not. If I'm sitting with somebody, a lot of times I will give them a curveball, and a very, very hard one. And a lot of times they go into crisis because of it. A lot of them can't handle that. And that doesn't go well for me. Sometimes. Other times, those curveballs, they don't benefit the family. So, like, if I've got a woman on stage and she's like, I don't know whether to break up with this guy of mine, and I start having her question herself, and she suddenly comes to the realization she's going to leave the guy, obviously when she gets back home after the workshop and is like, I'm leaving you today, they're going to instantly say, oh, they were just at a Teal Swan workshop. She must be a whore. So that's basically where they go with it. And so it's a mix of these two things that creates this incredible controversy. But I get more than other people in the business by far, and it's confused many people. I'm the only person actually at my publishing company that needs security. So, hey. I wasn't actually anticipating all this, I have to be honest. I would love to say that I see everything in advance, but I have gotten 10 times the controversy that I thought I would.
And do you think that that's in your power to change, though? I mean, as far as dealing with your own shadows?
Yes, but I also have a little bit of a problem here. I'm going to explain it quickly. I was trying to understand my own life path a while back, years ago, in fact, and I ended up going out and looking at my own life path potentials. People have thousands of them, but 3 primary life paths. And what blew my mind when I went out to look at mine, thousands upon thousands of these life path potentials for my future, I was a match to a very gruesome public murder in every single one of them. I was wondering, like, is this always about, the past, and is there a way to avoid this fate, basically? And what was very interesting is I was actually guided by 3 beings through this process of looking at my own life paths and the different potentials that would line me up with certain things. And every one of them explained that the reason that the higher self chose into that path is because of the fact that it attracts so much attention. It's not a different death than many people opt for. Jesus opted for public execution, for example. Would we even know who he was today if it wasn't for that death? Who knows? So oftentimes, higher selves will choose into that type of a life path potential specifically because it's what makes the work last. And then I had to come down and have a come to Jesus moment with myself, and I asked myself, what is my level of commitment to this work? If I had a guarantee 100% that what I'm doing in the world and the change that I'm trying to make would only work if I got killed, would I still do it? And would I stick to that life path? And the answer is yes. So there started to become this very shady area, which I wasn't expecting running into, about what the right and the wrong way is to die, and also choice of death according to your plan. So there's, suffice to say, there's some multidimensional stuff going into my choice of death.
Okay. But do you have power
Yes.
to... Okay. By simply working on the shadows?
Yes, which I am doing.
Okay. And as you do that, you should have less criticism and possibly not have to die early.
That's the theory.
Okay.
I'm going to see if it works.
Good. So tell me...
Or if it might be, this is the thing about the unconscious. It's like, as I explore dealing with these shadows, uncovering layer after layer, healing layer after layer, either the controversy goes away or it intensifies and I learn something different about the way the universe works, and then I'll be teaching about that. I'm okay with it being unknown.
Tell me about Teal Tribe.
Ooh, okay. Well...
It's a conscious community, right?
Yeah, that's another reason that I'm controversial. Okay, so I forgot them too. There's a lot of reasons. Basically, people are calling Teal Tribe a cult, which is completely inaccurate. What it is that when I was 15 years old, I was in a situation where I didn't fit into my family. I was completely left out of the community that I was living in, and I was cutting myself in the middle of the night with nobody there for me at all. And my parents were downstairs asleep, my brother was asleep, and it was the first time I realized that I had no one. So, obviously, if we watch the majority of careers people have or purposes that they have and like these major callings, it always stems from that kind of contrast. So naturally, when I started getting into this work, I was so interested in being able to get people into a space where they had access to other people, where if they were suffering at 3 o'clock in the morning, same as me, that they would have somewhere to go where they could have other people from around the world, so it didn't matter what time zone you were in, who were like, oh, hey, I'm here to talk exactly at this moment. So I started to make a lot of my work even less about me and my teachings as about the community itself. It's kind of more like a modern day Sangha. So Teal Tribe is this group of people who are, we could consider them pretty devoted to my teachings and to actually practicing them. So they help each other to practice them, and they come together and support each other. They don't live together yet. I would love to see some intentional communities popping up out of them, but right now it's mostly people that exist in all these different cities, and they've got this online connection to each other, and then the workshops or whatever gathering that we're doing serve as an opportunity for them to come together. And it's through that community that I plan to make a lot of change here. And that's, of course, my more long-term goals is not just me spending my life on a stage talking. I want to actually create programs that replace the current programs that we have in jails. I want to be affecting the way that we deal with our food in this country. I want to be affecting education immensely and with actual programs, not just talking about those programs. So my intention is to funnel a lot of those people within the Teal Tribe into these types of projects. So for example, if we find a way to, say, start a business where we're funneling people from jail into that business specifically so that they can then be released into society with some kind of backing, not just left on the street and like, sorry, you got in trouble once. So I would like the people in Teal Tribe to be the first people who are working there with, alongside the inmates, for example, because they've got the same vision that I do for this world.
So there's some kind of online platform you created to facilitate this interaction? Yes. I see. And what do? Just they chat and interact, basically? Okay. Yeah,
they form intense connections. Like, Teal Tribe is its own thing now. Like, it exists without me. Like, half the time they're meeting together and I'm like, oh, you're having a gathering? I didn't even know about it. But, yeah.
So about how many people do you have involved in this now?
The Teal Tribe is about 16,000 members that are real committed. Mm-hmm. And then I've got my satellite people who are like, I've got about 300 to 400,000 of those who are just sort of like, I don't know, I've got 1 foot in the spiritual field and 1 foot kind of like pretending that I'm still normal, which is why I have 2 Facebook accounts type of people. So, yeah.
So long term, you want to create physical communities. Is there
anything? I do, yeah. I think community is the way for the future. I think it's the only way to actually live here, to be honest. It's what's the most natural for us physical humans. And to be quite honest, it's the only way that our species is going to survive, because the single-family household is perhaps the most dysfunctional thing that we've created. It's unhealthy. There isn't a real way to make it work. It destroys children. And so I would love to see it die, to tell you the honest truth. And I feel like it's in community where we're going to see the real healthy changes within society, where we're going to see differences in the way that money is handled, where we're going to see organic ways of growing and ways of creating sustainable housing and things like that. The birth of that stuff is in community. And also, we're social beings. That's the reality. And we've created a society where we're dependent on our jobs and we don't really have connections to people, but it's those connections to people that actually make us live and thrive, not just survive. So I want to create those communities. And it doesn't really matter to me, actually, when it comes to intentional community. It doesn't really matter to me whether they really give a crap about what I'm teaching or not. It's that I want to create a structure to set up their capacity to thrive within those communities. So let's say we set up an intentional community for med students, where they're all able to support each other and it's all about medical school. We can do that. And it can be healthy because it can be a community setting. I mean, you don't have to be spiritual to believe in communities. I mean, it's awesome if people treat it like a song and it becomes a place where you can practice, but it's not necessary. And we know this based off of the stuff that's been happening over in Europe. Scandinavia is doing amazing work right now with this, where you've got these buildings, units where families would live, but now they've got a common area and they've got common eating practices. And so let's say you've got a single mother, for example, which would have been disastrous, right? Any single moms in this society will tell you this is disaster. Like, you're basically making enough money to put your kid in childcare and nothing on top of it. So let's say you put this woman in one of these intentional communities where she doesn't have to be living in the same room as everyone. She's got her own room, just like an apartment, but she's got that connection. And if she's ever in a pickle, where she's like, oh my gosh, my boss just said I couldn't leave the office and I have to pick up my kid. She has 20 people potentially. She can be like, can you please pick up my kid? So it can be this kind of support network. And I think it's so necessary, like just so necessary. I can't even tell you. That is another thing that I'm doing. And to begin with, we haven't done a big one yet, but I wanted to be doing intentional community expos where we bring together people from all different kinds of approaches who all have something to feed into the idea of intentional community. Maybe it's conflict resolution. Maybe it's how trading or economy works within intentional communities. Maybe it's somebody who understands sustainable living. I want them all to be able to come together in the same place. I also had a vision. I'm really hoping that I can create this someday in a practical way, and also vet people, which is really necessary because I'll tell you, the spiritual field is full of vampires, basically. It's full of the most amazing people and also the most dysfunctional people. And there's nothing worse than trying to start an intentional community with a dysfunctional personality type who basically makes everyone else's life hell. So the vetting process would have to be pretty intense. But I would like to make an online dating type of site specifically for intentional community, though. So like it matches people to where they belong. And it matches them with the intentional community that they really would thrive in. Because there are some really lonely people on the planet who would really thrive in that type of a situation. And people who could benefit by them. So.
Yeah, I think 50%. I think the statistic is 50% of Americans live alone. So.
Yeah.
So have there been any problems that you've encountered with this community setup, or are there any problems you're...
Oh, you will always encounter problems when there's people involved.
What are some of the problems?
Well, some of the problems that for an intentional community to work, people need to look at the intentional community as if it's a being in and of itself that they're trying to feed into. It's kind of a larger concept than that you get into when you're thinking about a marriage. A marriage is about the third person, which is actually the relationship itself. And so both parties need to be feeding into that in order to have it survive. And what you watch is a lot of people will get into intentional community specifically because they're in a starvation pattern. So all they do is take, and drain, and then blame everyone, and they get into their control drama. And so instead of the intentional community being a healthy one that feeds into the community, it becomes all about one person's dysfunction. And so if I can ever figure out a way, I haven't really put my energy into it yet because I've been busy with other things, but if I ever find a way to really get around that, you can bet I'll be teaching about it because it's a real theme within intentional community. Conflict resolution also is perhaps the most important thing if you're going to involve a bunch of people with each other, all with different boundaries and different desires. And yeah.
So you recently got married.
Mm-hmm.
How long ago was that?
July.
Okay. So how has that been for you? It's the first time you've been married, or 4 times? Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So being married 4 times.
Yeah.
Help me understand from the perspective of your teachings, is that because...
It doesn't really fit into my teachings anywhere.
It doesn't.
Well, not like directly. I mean, I'm sure I could weave it in there, but I haven't really tried to justify it in any way.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand, is there, from your perspective, should a person have, I mean, now Osho had an entirely different perspective.
Oh, I know.
Right? It was just...
I know, and that's my joke about Osho. Disregard everything he says about relationships if you want to have a good relationship. Osho didn't really believe in relationships, did
right.
he? Yeah.
No, he didn't. But in order to have a good relationship, you really have, like you said, you have to feed into you have to both put into the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Which is essentially you're trying to build a third thing that is flourishing,
yeah,
and that also embodies the same qualities we started this conversation with, which are continuing to become better, or
yes.
I can't remember the exact. But so if we're doing that, then we should have one relationship, right?
I hate using words like should and shouldn't, but what I watch...
Well, I'm just trying, conceptually, I mean.
Conceptually, what I watch is that when people aren't willing to make that commitment to a single relationship for as long as that single relationship is benefiting, basically, is that people run from themselves. I mean, the best thing about a relationship, which is also the worst thing about a relationship, is that you're unable to escape from yourself, both the light aspects and the dark aspects. So the people who bounce out of relationship, the minute it gets uncomfortable, basically, are the kind of people who never actually get past the things that would really set them free. It's like the minute the going gets tough, which is where the real good work could be done, where you could really open up to a new dimension of yourself. People are just like, peace.
I see. And so that explains a lot of divorce. So do you think that everybody
That's why most men run from me.
So all of your marriages previously, the men ran from you? Is that what you're saying?
All but one. One of my relationships, well, actually, all of my relationships did end because, by the way, most people think it would be a dream to be with somebody like me. It's a nightmare. It is a bloody nightmare to be with a spiritual teacher. You will never be able to run from anything, ever. And so, me even more so because I'm a reflector. And so, as a reflector personality type, there's nowhere to hide. I mean literally nowhere. So it ends up being kind of situation where men tend to shut down on it and they start to clam up and run. And whether they run by actually leaving, like the last one, or whether they run by basically shutting down like a clam in on themselves, it's all the inability, they feel like they can't get past a certain thing that they run into, which is inevitable in relationships. It happens very quickly with me. But you get into a relationship and then you run up against that one blockage. So, for example, with my second husband, who's actually one of my closest friends. He's the father of my son, still part of my intentional community. Getting with me, the first thing that he ran into was his issue relative to finances, and the fact that like he grew up in a family where every time he tried to do something, it was always discouraged. There's 5 kids in the family, and he was the youngest of 5. So it was like, I want to go do karate. We don't have any money for that. So every time he got excited, it was a shutdown. So basically, in adulthood, that creates this pattern of like, I would love to go do something, but I just can't. So practically in the marriage, that turned into a situation where, we had agreed that I was going to stay at home as a stay-at-home mom. And he couldn't bring home money, literally couldn't do it. And it was because he was running into that shadow, right? And instead of being able to move beyond it and actually go out and do something in the world, he just shut down. And so I ended up having to be the one to do it, but it killed the romance, basically. So that's an example of like running into that shadow, basically, and not being able to move beyond it.
Is that in any way a reflection of your own shadow, though,
Always.
that you continue to attract those kinds of relationships?
Always.
Okay. And can you tell that you're actually evolving beyond that?
I can, yeah, because my patterning is changing. Like, you just watch your patterns to know how you're doing in relationships. All 3 of my first marriages, the men had the same birthday. 3 men with the same birthday. Can you believe that? It's a little creepy. Astrologers like, whoa. On top of that, I married them all within 2 weeks of knowing them. This latest relationship, I took over a year, in fact, to marry the guy, which is like, for me, that's the length of a Bible. So that's a different pattern already right there. Going for a guy who's really interested in me versus one who's kind of aloof, very different pattern for me. Yeah, I mean, I can tell based off of how the relationship is going that I've been evolving in relationships, and relationships have been my place of non-health, to tell you the honest truth, which we would expect because of the fact that my childhood trauma is all about relationships. It's about abuse, interpersonal abuse. So, of course, you'd see relationship addiction. You'd see love addiction. You'd see somebody who's terrified to be in the world. I was not acclimatized to this place until I was 19. So what's the first thing you do as a woman? You get released out into the world and you like have no life skills. You grab onto a guy as fast as you can. So, I mean, it's really obvious why I would have had those shadows. Really obvious how I've been getting beyond them as well. But obviously, I mean, people hold me to a much higher standard than the average person, and people hold each other to a very high standard. So when they find out that I've been in that many marriages, the first thing they do is, oh my God, don't ever listen to that woman about relationships. But I think it's funny that relationships tend to be the only thing that people have that attitude towards, because it's like, if you meet a person who's like a skiing expert, for example, and he's been in a bunch of avalanches, you're like, oh, I'm going to trust that guy then. But relationship seems to be where we're like, no, only trust the person who's had only one relationship and only long term.
So is there such a thing as soulmates?
Yeah.
There are a lot of, especially in the spiritual circles these days, there's a lot of educational programs and teleseminars and whatnot about how to find your soulmate. And is it possible to find or attract your soulmate, or is everyone are you just going to attract them anyway, though?
What do you mean?
Meaning, did you intentionally try to attract all of your husbands, and were they all soulmates?
I think, yes. My first 3, I think, were soulmates, and I think I found actually a twin flame, which is completely different. Now, the issue, of course, in this community is that a lot of us use the same word, like a soulmate or twin flame, and we actually mean completely different things. But,
Then define those words first so we know what we're talking about.
Okay, so when I'm talking about it, a twin flame is essentially when a soul stream splits into polar aspects, usually a female and male, not always. And when you find that type of a person or an embodiment, you will experience what people say when you meet your soulmate. You will feel that kind of like, my God, it's a compatibility that's beyond compatibility. And you get that kind of secure softness that everybody's looking for. If, from my definition, a soulmate is quite the opposite. It's a person who's going to literally show you everything that's preventing you from finding a feel-good relationship. They're just as beneficial. It's just that it's not going to feel real great, you know. Oh, and some of them more than others. But yeah, I mean, I think it's totally possible for people to find that relationship that really feels good to them.
Well, to some extent, though, if our lives are predetermined.
Most people, not most people, many people on the planet have pre-selected that type of partnership to line up with in this life, because it's the closest that we get to that feeling of oneness, that experience of what we could say God really is in embodied form. That's why so many people opt into that. So
is it necessary for us to intentionally try to attract?
No.
Okay. So it's going to happen or it's not going to happen?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this twin flame...
But even ask yourself this question. If there's somebody who really wants it, can you get rid of the wanting? No. So it's going to be calling you forward. And you will be lined up with the teachers who are going to purify your shadows. You will line up with the teachers who will give you the key to lining up with that person. So that's why I say it's inevitable. Reaching those types of things are inevitable because you can't unwant something that you want. You may try to lie to yourself. It's never going to work. So, I mean, if you really want a soulmate, chances are so high, so high that you have one.
What comes first, though, the wanting or the soulmate?
What do you mean, which comes first?
Meaning, was the person already going to be in your life before the wanting even happened, or did the wanting coexist with it? Is it possible to come into an existence where you were not supposed to meet a soulmate and then want it so strongly that
Yes, it's possible.
Okay.
Yes, that is possible.
Okay.
It's more rare, but I have seen it.
So what happened to this twin flame?
What do you mean, what happened?
Is that who you're married to now?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Oh, yeah. The twin flame relationship is much different. It's confusingly different.
And so the twin flame is much more positive.
Yeah, from my definition. Some spiritual teachers are going to tell you the exact opposite. But that's because the way they define it is basically flip-flop and reverse from mine.
Mm-hmm. I find a lot of people are trying to track their soulmates, and they have a heck of a time with them once they do.
Mm-hmm.
So is that just because of karmic? Or rather, I know you don't like to use the word karma, but whatever. Past life ties with that person that you...
No, it's because when you are wanting to line up with that feel-good relationship, when most of us are talking about the soulmate, or what I'm calling the twin flame, basically, that's what they want so badly, is that feeling of unity with a person, that feeling of, like, never going to be alone again, that feeling. Fusion with mommy, frankly, from a psychological perspective. So... when you're wanting that so intensely, the universe will provide you the capacity to get there. But it does so often by mirroring to you the aspects that are preventing you from being there. And so, like, let's say you want that feel-good relationship, but you've got an aspect in you that still can only feel like it's a good person by virtue of being the victim. You'll line up with an abuser. So when you get to the point where you're willing to be like, I'm done with that type of relationship, and I know that I'm done with that type of relationship because I'm choosing an entirely different direction, the universe has actually put that person right there specifically to be the one that sets you on that path, totally in the direction of that soulmate relationship. But you would never have gotten there unless you switched that pattern. So these really uncomfortable relationships are purifying us of those patterns. Now, I really do wish sometimes, honestly, that you could just like push a button and have that process be expedited so you didn't have to do it that way. But that seems to be the way it's been done.
So let's switch subjects a little bit and talk about the world and what's going on these days. Because you've made a lot of forecasts or on your blog, and I think a lot of people are very curious about those things. So in the United States, we're coming up on an election soon, which I don't know what you think about elections and whether they even matter, and whether voting is even relevant these days, or if it ever was. And I also understand that you are planning on leaving the United States and moving abroad or somewhere else because you don't really believe we're on the right path. So tell me a little bit about And I don't see how that could even be a new thing. I mean, we've been kind of on the wrong path for a while, right? So
Everything's speeding up, I can tell you that.
okay, so tell me a little about what you're seeing and what's prompted you to make a decision to leave here because of what you're seeing.
What I'm seeing is a third world war. And I've seen that for, as long as I've been here. And the human race has been lining up with it, and lining up with it, and lining up with it. And there was a lot of media, especially before 2012, that was basically hoping that we could tip the scales and not line up with the destruction. Let's call it the forest fire before the rebirth. Because, forest fires are all well and good in theory, but until you're up close with one of them, So, knowing what a third world war entails for the destruction of a society that has been, in order for a new one to take its place, which seems to be what humanity has wanted, rather than to change the old system. It's not pretty.
Well, world war implies world, right? So where are you going to go that there's not a war?
There are places in every conflict that experience less of the conflict. It is not going to be possible in this type of a conflict to escape the conflict completely. But it is possible to survive it.
So you're anticipating an actual physical war with military and things like that?
Yeah, no, this is not a spiritual way. On that level it exists, but no. And at this point, let's just say that what they will be using is not conducive to human life.
And so you see this happening in the United States. In what time frame?
Well, that's the interesting part. See, this is what frustrates. I actually hate making predictions. This is what's funny. People ask me what I think about the future, and I actually am one of the, let's say, seers that hates giving predictions the most, because I see the variability in all life path potentials. And when people are awake, it gets 10 times worse, by the way. Because, have you ever been to the New York Stock Exchange, for example, and you see the boards, they're just switching, you're just watching that? To begin with, when you're looking at an unconscious person, somebody who's pretty much sleepwalking through life, their life path potentials are so stagnated that it's like, I could put all the money in the world on what's going to happen in their life. But the minute that somebody awakens to the fact that they have any conscious will to enforce and create a change, you start to see the switching of the life paths. However, when you're looking at certain life paths that the human race itself as a consciousness is lined up with, you've been seeing these events static in those life paths for a very long time, and us actually lining up with them more and more and more. So in the life paths that I'm watching, the United States isn't even in the war. In fact, we're taken out before the war. Now, being taken out before the war means we're in a state of civil unrest. When America's basically had experienced the collapse of the dollar, and we're trying to figure out where our next food is going to come from, it doesn't matter who we're bombing. So basically, in that type of a circumstance, it's down to the two largest powers in the world in terms of who's going to take over: China and Russia.
And so this is a fixed timeline at this point? Or?
It's fixed, yeah. It's fixed enough that I don't see us avoiding it. It's just the variable is when. It's not if, it is when. And honestly, if we swing a certain way in this particular election, I give us 3 months before we're in the conflict. I'm not going to stick around longer than that. And so this is the thing. I've also been talking a lot about the fact that certain members, basically, of our let's say, conscious group, are meant to be creating the new. All the focus should be in terms of, what's going to be the replacement to this? Because everybody's sick of it. To tell you the truth, even the people who are deeply embedded in the system, deeply unconscious, not practicing spirituality, not on the path of awakening consciously, these types of people are sick of the system. Everyone's sick of the system, worldwide. That's a problem. Because if everyone's sick of the system, they desire something completely new, which usually entails a complete of what was. So, yeah, it's in the desire path for all humans on planet Earth for this current society to end, literally. Yeah, God.
So where is it in the desire path for everyone to have to suffer to get to that end?
It's not. What it is, it's like we described before. On an individual level, you could want something super, super badly. Why do you keep lining up with that relationship? the human race is going to have to purify itself of all the things that are creating the old system to get to the new system. How it doesn't take a genius to look at that and know that that purification process is not going to be the most beautiful. We're already in the wake of seeing some of it right now. It's why you turn on the news and you see these Islamic attacks in Europe and things like that. This is just a symptom. This is what we see when we're purifying ourselves of the things that make us not a match to the society that we collectively actually want. Regardless of our faith, we experience everything that is unlike it. So those of us that are still imprisoned within the system will experience more imprisonment. Those of us who are unable to get past the hatred we feel towards others will basically burn in the fires of our own hatred. That's what we will experience. And so I've been talking for a long time about the fact that many of us who are on the conscious path are meant to build the new society, right? And many are meant to be kind of transition people, grassroots workers, the workers who basically are with the people who are falling down so as to help them with that jump over to consciousness. Oftentimes, and this is no exception, it's just going to happen on a mass scale, it takes people lining up with a very seriously jarring experience in order to wake up. I mean, the average person doesn't just roll out of bed on a Tuesday and suddenly things are different. Usually it's like, I got in a high-speed car wreck, I ran into a tree at 70 miles an hour and had an awakening. I lost somebody in my family and had an awakening. That's the kind of thing that leads to it. So there are a great many of us who are meant to basically be on that side with those people having those peak experiences, which really feel like rock bottom to them, that are helping them basically get over and make the transition to the new society. However, I always assumed I would be that person. When I looked at my own life path potentials, if I chose to stay, if that conflict, let's just say that conflict that I'm seeing 100% comes to be, and in the time frame that is most likely, I'm not even going to live. Because all alternative people, especially the ones that have any kind of following, are going to get killed.
So nowadays I see, in the work that I'm doing anyway, and a lot of the people I'm surrounded by, there is an immense awakening happening, right? There are so many people who are becoming conscious, more and more conscious at a more rapid rate. So is it even possible that could, if that accelerated in the next 6 months to a year, that timeline could shift?
I am unwilling to say that anything's impossible. And I'm not even willing to throw in the towel completely in terms of my own desire to see that happen. But if I was going to base my predictions entirely on what I've seen, I do not see how it's possible to avoid this war.
So how are individuals watching a show like this, how should they prepare for this time, or even if there was a possibility of shifting that timeline, what do they need to do that, to cause that?
I actually think it's quite complementary, I mean, regardless of which direction you want to take with it. Meaning whether you want to try to prevent it or whether you want to try to basically make a plan for an alternative route, it's pretty much the same action. You got to make drastic changes you've been putting off. I did this talk once where I was kind of alluding to this big thing that's been happening, which I really hate talking about because like half the people that watch it go into a depressive stump afterwards and I can't feel good about what I've done for the world. But basically, I was talking about the fact that most people live in a cage, right? So we talk about quitting our job. We talk about what we're going to do in the future when we have enough money. We talk about these things, but we never do them. And so, like, for example, in the spiritual community, the New Age communities, how many people talk about intentional community? But do they ever actually create one? No, it's a very rare person that does. So it's like we're in this little box. We know which direction we need to go for our own expansion. We have felt that calling in our being. And so the universe, which is, benevolent on that one level, but doesn't really understand what that experience is like on a physical 3D level, is like, oh, you got a box there that you can't get past? Let me smash the damn thing for you. So basically, you watch, this is happening all day, every day. A massive world war is no exception to the rule. Every day you've got a person who's like, I just can't make this step. And the universe is like, fine, let me make it for you. You're fired. And so they're like, crap, I'm fired. Now I have no other option but to do it. So we literally push it to the extent We've like gotten to such a far extent that the universe has to take away our life vest, right? So my suggestion to people, if they wanted to prevent the war, is take the reason for the universe doing that away from the universe. The universe is going to break your cage if you've got a cage. Get rid of the cage today, like now, and electively. So I would ask people to ask themselves, what does that cage look like in my life? What have I been saying that I need to do, but just am not doing yet because of fear or whatever it is? Take that action step. And it's going to be scary, but it's less scary than having to do it when you have no options left.
So along those lines, is this why people get cancer or because they're not on the wrong path? Well, not the wrong path, but...
Yeah, it's like what you mean, yes. Yeah. These things happen to us because they are there for our benefit. Now, when you're in the middle of it, you don't ever want to be told that. No one probably should, Like, it's not like you should walk into somebody who's like, in the last stages of leukemia and be like, you know what? I think this is happening for your benefit right now. No. Like, at that point, just shush, because it's the worst thing you can say to somebody. But it is ultimately the truth of our reality. We line up with these peak experiences, these circumstances where we experience our life completely unraveling so that we can basically metamorphose into something completely different, but something way better, which is what you'll hear from people who are survivors. People who are survivors aren't like, oh my gosh, that was the worst thing that I've ever gone through and it was totally horrible and I'm finally so glad that I figured out how to live life. It's not how they speak. The ones who survive, who really get through it, they learn the lesson from it. And the lesson is always, thank God, I was really headed in a bad direction, Yeah.
So we need to discover what we're really passionate about.
Yes, always.
And then pursue that wholeheartedly in order to change the world direction, basically.
And by the way, when you do that, you're on the path of enlightenment. You will inevitably be taken to whatever you need to be taken to in order to become what you've been calling enlightened. It's just a concept until you reach that space. But honest to God, like, you could remove every spiritual teacher, just remove everything they've ever said, and simplify and purify the message to, you have to commit to your passion, follow it to the ends of the earth, and you will have a life worth living. That's simple. My job would be easy. Maybe I should just make a bumper sticker.
Yeah, I do notice a lot of people do get stuck. Usually it's just fear of getting started. But so what happens, what about people who do something and they hit a wall or an obstacle along the way? Is that a shadow or is that just an obstacle that they need to move past?
Well, if you go into the shadow, you will move past the obstacle or you'll go in a different direction. That's the thing. We have got to stop the obsession, which is nothing more than fear of trying to figure out what the end game is going to look like. So, for me, for example, I was an athlete. And so every part of me was like, I want to have an Olympic gold medal. That's my thing, right? That's my jam. At age 4, I'm like, I'm going to be an Olympic athlete. Like, I love that. That was my whole thing. So if I was conceptualizing what was right for me for this life, it would have looked like that. So every time I run into a situation where I was blocked in terms of my own sports career, I would have assumed that I was supposed to be on the podium. So obviously, whenever I get through that shadow or past that, I would go in that direction. Holy crap, did the universe have like a curveball for me there. What I found, after going through one of my patterns is, this is me trying to escape, in fact. I do love sports. I still love sports. But most of my reason for being there was not actually pure. And I was not willing to see that until I went through it. So it was a moment, for example, where I went through this big shadow work exercise and I was like, what the difference between me and people who are on that podium is that I'm 10 times more scared of losing than I like winning. So it's not that I love this sport more than anything in the world. It's that I love what it does for me. In fact, more than doing races, I actually hated races. What I love is that feeling of being in a uniform and being up on the podium. I love that. That is natural to me. So of course, I go through that and the universe is like, you total different direction than I ever thought I would be going in. So we have to be brave enough as we go in the direction of our passion to let the universe bring us to exactly what we're meant to be doing. And I can promise you that no part of me is like, oh my God, I wish I would have been an Olympic gold medalist. Hell no. No, I actually watched the Olympics now, which I still love to death, but I watched it. I was like, God, I'm glad I'm not racing. That was so much pressure. I didn't like that half as much as this, but I would never have known it. You know?
So what do you see long-term for the world?
Long-term for the world, this is going to be the kind of reality that everybody has been wanting. Human beings will be capable of governing themselves without an external government to rule over them. We will be able to trust our own conscience. We're going to be able to experience a group mind for the first time, where we're not separate from each other's thoughts, and so there is no such thing as misunderstanding. And this is unanimous. So when I tell people about the long-term outcome, it's very, very positive. It's something that all of us have been wanting.
And when we say long-term, are we talking 100 years, 50 years? I mean, what's a rough...
I don't know. I don't have a rough estimate for that.
I mean, do you study astrology, or is it just a fascination? No. Okay, because from an astrology perspective, I would think in 25 years we would see some pretty dramatic changes.
Oh, we'll see dramatic changes in 25 years for sure.
Yeah.
But this ultimate society, which I'm seeing, which is like global, basically, it's not going to happen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about the manifestation of technology in our world? A lot of people, especially who are spiritually minded, are very anti-technology. But do you think that technology, such as the internet, and even a lot of people are really concerned with artificial intelligence and the implications of that?
Oh, yeah.
But do you think that consciousness, so is technology evil or not evil, or is consciousness always going to manifest in all of its different ways and whatever it is?
Thank you. What he said. So basically, these creations are like tools. They're as beautiful as the user, or as ugly as the user. So basically, I feel like I'm a little bit of a nerd in this respect, and that I love what science does for us, and I love what technology does for us. I absolutely love it until it doesn't work. We have to realize that there are limitations to any one of these tools. We can't let it get away from the user. Science can kill. It can also save. Technology can kill. It can also save. It's the same story as with a physical human. You've got shadow and you've got light. Every one of us is capable of murder. Every one of us is capable of creating joy. So it's about what are we going to do with it. And so I'm not concerned with technology in and of itself, any more than I'm concerned with money in and of itself, any more than I'm concerned with science in and of itself. I'm concerned with how it's being used. And I think that we have the capacity to use it in ways that just are amazing. I mean, honestly, I would not have the following I have today without social media, for example. In social media, if you want to look at shadows, let's look at social media. So we've got shadow and light there too. But I mean, look at the good that it can do. We are capable of using it for the benefit of mankind instead of the detriment of mankind. But it requires us being honest about how we are individually using it. But we don't have much control over what the government's doing with it. I mean, maybe some people watching this do, and if you do, then really try to use that power. But if you don't have power over that, the one power you do have is how you're using it. How am I using technology? Is the way that I am using technology in alignment or out of alignment? If it's in alignment, then it's benefiting you.
Well, speaking about the government or even artificial intelligence, for example, does it really matter for who we vote for in the election? Or
ultimately, not really, because what's dictating this whole damn thing is our desire. It's the momentum of our desire. So, like, literally, if you want to talk about what really fixes presidential races, more so than even hidden ballots, for example, it's always about human desire. And if we want destruction of the system, then the president who will do that the quickest is going to be elected. If we want to maintain the system for longer than it's longer, like it is, then the president who does that is going to be elected. If we want radical change, then the president who does that is going to be elected. But the reason that I am a bit worried about this upcoming election is because I see the human race desiring more so the demolishment of this current structure than the maintaining of it. And I don't see a presidential candidate in the race who's going to change the old into something new, if you catch my drift.
But wouldn't the collective consciousness ultimately dictate what the president does as opposed to the president really mattering?
No, because they have free will. See, that is the same kind of argument as people that say, if you had a positive focus, could you eat junk food and be healthy? Now, I'm going to tell you in theory, in principle, yes, but it defies the law of attraction. The law of attraction works like this. If you vibrate at a certain frequency and you introduce the frequency of something like a donut, they are a vibrational mismatch. So the body will reject it. So you don't, even though in theory you'd be completely accurate, because the law of attraction, it doesn't necessarily work that way. The way it works is if you want destruction, the president who is in alignment with destruction of the current system comes into presidency. It's not like if you're in alignment with world change, the president who's in alignment with destruction then is altered by the collective. But I would love if that happened. Say, like, if that would have happened, then Cheney, for example, would have gotten a heart transplant, and a heart transplant would have done something. It was a lovely joke, wasn't it? Let's hope
very good. Well, so where can people find, I'm sure most of our viewers already know who you are and where to find your stuff, but and now you've written 2 books, right? 3 books. Okay, what are the 3 books?
The first book is The Sculptor in the Sky. The second book is Shadows Before Dawn, which is all about self-love. And the third one is The Completion Process, which is the one about trauma resolution.
Which is the one that has brought you here.
Yes.
And they're all on Amazon, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about your website and your Teal Tribe?
Okay,
How do people get involved?
www.tealswan.com. Just remember my name. And then on Facebook, Teal Tribe is a closed group, but if you basically want to join, then I've got admins that will bring you in. Also, what's really interesting is I've got this, for this process, the completion process, I have a website, thecompletionprocess.com, which is like an online forum for anybody who's wanting to do this emotional work with other people as well, and that can be a really great place for people to go to. I also have videos that I put out every single Saturday on a different subject, so it's almost like gamble chocolates. You never know what you're going to get with me. But people usually, if they're really into my material, they tune in, because every Saturday it's like on the morning of Saturday, they're going to find out what I want to talk about this week, and it's a different subject every week, so that's pretty interesting. You can subscribe to that on YouTube. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, thank you for coming out here, and well, actually, you were out here anyway, but thank you for taking the time to meet with me today and to speak with our viewers. And well, what if we were to end today with anything? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about, or that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, if I was to share something with the audience, it's like a spin-off of what we've been saying. Like, now is the time, basically, in your life that you have to be honest with yourself about whether you are living inside of a self-inflicted cage. What I mean by that is justifying why you have to stay in the job you hate, justifying why you're not taking that step you know you have to take. Now, really, it's no longer a luxury to maintain those self-imposed prisons. So if you recognize any of those aspects in your life, now is the time to get out of them. Just be brave enough to do it, because there's never going to come a time where it's going to get easier than this.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Awaken Empowered TV. Join me next week as I speak with another incredible individual who's standing on the leading edge and changing the world.